All right. Happy New Year, everyone, and I will officially be the first to welcome you to the city of Mulberry. This is historic, so I'm very excited, but thank you for being here. We don't have, obviously, since we are meeting at midnight, we don't have a pastor here, so we are going to skip the invocation, so I'm going to move right into the call to order. I'm first going to call the roll. If you could announce present if you're here. District 1, Councilman Tim Sullivan.
Present.
Councilman from District 2, Michael Coker, that is me, I am here. District 3, Kyle Shields. District 4, Mayor Pro Tem Michael Rudnick.
Present.
And District 5, Council Member Doug Ingram.
Present.
Okay, we have 4 out of the 5 council members are present, Madam Clerk, if you could note that. At this time, we're going to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're able, I pledge allegiance to the flag. The first item, we have copies, as always, of the agenda down here if anybody would like to come pick one up. But the first item, item E, the first action item, is a resolution. It is Moratorium Resolution 250101, which is a moratorium on permitting, licensing, planning and zoning for a period, and then we will, like I said, and then once the council is able to get things up and running, then we can go ahead and lift that moratorium. Is there any discussion on the moratorium? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and call a vote. I will make a motion to adopt the resolution number 250101, the moratorium. Do I have a second?
You have a second.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, at this time I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, the resolution 250101 passes by a vote of 4. Okay, so as I said before, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting for the city of Mulberry. Obviously, we're going to have some beautiful fireworks out the window while we do the meeting tonight. But I wanted to thank everyone for coming. Like I said before, this is a historic night. You are witnessing history. So it's the newest city in the state of Georgia. And so thank you for being here. I know that it's not easy getting out here on New Year's Eve at midnight. But we appreciate you being here to witness a part of history. So thank you. The next thing on the agenda, item G, is a consideration of the meeting summary from December the 30th of 2024 at 6:30 p.m. I believe that all the council members present have a copy of that meeting summary in front of them. Is there any discussion, or have you had a chance to review these meeting summaries, and is there any errors or omissions on that summary? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adopt the meeting summary for December 30th, 2024.
Make a motion to adopt the meeting summary for December 30th, 2024, 6:30 p.m. as
Okay,
presented.
do I have a second?
You have a second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, I will call a vote. All in favor of adopting the meeting summary? All opposed? Okay, the meeting summary for December 30th, 2024 is hereby adopted. The next thing is the consideration of tonight's agenda. Obviously, we have quite a few ordinances to get through this evening. But is there any changes or addendums that need to be made for that meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I'd ask that you add a resolution to the end of the agenda tonight as an action item to adopt the Georgia State Statute on Records Retention for the city of Mulberry, Georgia. This would give the clerk direction as how she should retain her records. This is the statutory requirement for the state, and we ask that you make it a resolution for the city.
Okay, so Mr. Riley has proposed adding a record-keeping resolution, this statutory one, to the end of the meeting agenda. Is there any other items that need to be added? Councilman Ingram, I know that there was some discussion at our last meeting on the 30th about a commercial sublease, and there was some discussion about that. Is that something you feel prepared that we are ready to address tonight?
We are ready to address that.
Okay, then let's go ahead and add that as well. So let's add that just after, at the end, just after the resolution concerning record keeping. So that will be item, we'll call it, we'll call it L2. L2 will be the commercial sublease. Okay, any other items that need to be added to the agenda? Okay, then at this time, I will make a motion to amend the agenda to add item L1, which will be to adopt the statutory record-keeping resolution for the city of Mulberry, and then item L2, which will be the adoption or the discussion regarding a commercial sublease. Do I have a second on that amendment, those amendments?
A second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, then at this time I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, the amendment's passed. And then I will also make a motion then to adopt this meeting agenda for January 1st, 2025 as amended. Do I have a second for that?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, then we'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, great. The meeting agenda is adopted by a vote of 4 for the evening. Next up on the agenda is we have reserved some time for public comments. Madam Clerk, do you have your clipboard with you? Okay, that's okay. If you would like to make a public comment, we ask you just come up to the front. We're going to reserve 2 minutes per individual, so if anyone would like to come up and make a public comment, you may do so now. Okay, seeing no one, I will close public comments. That brings us to the action items with the ordinances. And so this would be the adoption of the emergency ordinances for the city of Mulberry, item J. So Mr. Riley, I will turn this over to you as we go through each of those ordinances.
Thank you, Mayor. The first one is under A is an emergency ordinance to provide for continuation in services on an emergency basis due to the nature of the startup of the city. And so we'd ask that you, the first one is the sexually oriented businesses ordinance. You've already heard about this ordinance as a regular ordinance previously, and you've been given the supporting data for the adoption of the ordinance that you were given in both in your thumb drives and in presentation on a previous occasion. There have been minor changes in the ordinance. They have changed some of the structure as to the available locations that will justify the ordinance and still give the people a speech opportunity that's required. But other than that, the ordinance remains the same. So I'd ask that you approve the emergency ordinance. What number would that be, Madam Clerk? 20. That would be ordinance 250120.
Is there any discussion about the ordinance 250120 from the council? No? Then at this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250120 pertaining to sexual-oriented businesses.
Second the motion.
Okay, well, I'll make the motion. We'll make that be the second. And then any other discussion? All right, at this time, we'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250120 regarding sexually oriented businesses, emergency ordinance 250120 is hereby adopted. Mr. Riley.
Mayor and council, Mayor Pro Tem. The next one would be an emergency ordinance for the continuation of governance during the transition period on adopting general provisions and setting methodologies to run the city. What number would that be, Madam Clerk? This is the same as the ordinance that was presented on a first read previously last month. This is the emergency ordinance that would give the continuation of services on an emergency basis. Ask that you adopt that also.
Any discussion about emergency ordinance 250121? Okay, at this time, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250121. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, at this time, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, emergency ordinance 250121 is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is an emergency ordinance to continuation of governance during the transition for creating an administration chapter that for the framework for the administration of the city of Mulberry government to run. What number would that be, Madam Clerk? I'd ask that you pass the emergency ordinance.
Any discussion about emergency ordinance 250122, creating a framework for administration for the city of Mulberry? Hearing none, I will call or entertain a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250122.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250122.
Thank you, Councilmember Sullivan.
Second.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rudnick. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250122 on administration is hereby adopted.
The next is an emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during the transition process by creating Chapter 6 of alcoholic beverages, creating a framework for controlling sales, distribution of alcoholic beverages. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250123.
I ask for the city, the council, mayor, and mayor pro tem to adopt that.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250123 pertaining to alcoholic beverages within the city of Mulberry? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adopt the ordinance.
Make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250123.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
You got a second?
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250123 regarding alcoholic beverages is hereby adopted.
The next emergency ordinance we have is an emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during the transition provisions of services from Gwinnett County on Chapter 10, Buildings and Building Regulations, creating a framework for construction, maintenance, enforcement, and demolition on properties within the city of Mulberry. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250124.
All right, is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250124 pertaining to buildings and building regulations? Hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250124 pertaining to building and building regulations. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250124 pertaining to building and building regulations is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance would be an emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition provision of services from Gwinnett County to Chapter 14, Businesses, creating a framework for operation and licenses of various businesses within the city of Mulberry. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250125.
All right, any discussion about emergency ordinance 250125 pertaining to businesses and business licensing? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250125.
I second the motion.
Okay, I'll make the motion, he'll second. And then any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, emergency ordinance 250125 by a vote of 4 is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is emergency ordinance to provide continuation of governance during the transition. Chapter 18, Environment, creating framework for erosion control, runoff, illicit discharge, stormwater management, and litter control. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250126.
Any discussion about the emergency ordinance 250126 pertaining to stormwater management and litter control?
A quick question, sorry. With stormwater, because we're not taking over that service, is that something, even though we're adopting this ordinance, that the county is still going to control and make sure takes place?
Well, they're going to do stormwater, continue stormwater. What this gives us the opportunity to do is that we will be able to cite for any violation that there might be. It would not be that we would be doing the work on stormwater at this point in time, but we adopt all the framework for citing violations.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, at this time I make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250126 pertaining to stormwater management and litter control. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250126 pertaining to stormwater and litter control is hereby adopted.
The next is be emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition of provision of services, Chapter 22, fire protection, creating a framework for fire safety regulations within the city. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250127.
Any discussion about emergency ordinance 250127 pertaining to fire protection?
I have a question. Mr. Riley, the framework of fire safety regulations, so this is adopted from Peachtree Corners, is that right?
It is.
Okay.
So it's consistent with us continuing to work with Gwinnett County. We adopt a set of ordinances that Gwinnett County or ourselves can enforce on fire protection. Part of the fire protection code is also part of the permitting code, because you're going to have a fire marshal that goes through all the process that goes through the fire protection piece on fire safety and design of buildings, and there are other items that are included in that too.
So a new business building in the city of Mulberry would find this to be standard practice?
This would be it would be the same practice as they had when they made an application within Gwinnett County for a permit.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other discussion about 250127? Okay, hearing none, I will make the motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250127 pertaining to fire safety. Do I have a second?
You have a second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250127 pertaining to fire and fire safety regulations is hereby adopted.
The next is an emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of services during transition, provision of services from Gwinnett County, creating a flood management plan for flood damage prevention and framework for its implementation. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250128.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250128 pertaining to flood management? Hearing none, I will make the motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250128 pertaining to flood management. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, I will call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250128 pertaining to flood management is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition of provisions of services from Gwinnett County, Chapter 14, Land Development Regulation, creating framework for requirements for land development. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250129.
Any discussion about emergency ordinance 250129 pertaining to land development?
Quick point of order. I think, Bill,
Here
you
you-
said 14? I think you said chapter 14 and the writing is chapter 34?
Chapter 14, I'm sorry, you're right. Chapter 34, Land Development. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, any other questions about 250129?
I have a quick question on this one. I think we've already covered it. I think we spoke about this, Mr. Mayor, but I have a question maybe for Mr. Riley.
Yes.
So land development regulations, so we're adopting from, again, Peachtree Corners, right?
Well, we're adopting land development regulations for Peachtree Corners. The next one you have beyond that is the one you have for the ordinance that's further down in number N. That comes from Gwinnett County.
Okay. I
And
see.
so what we're doing is we're taking everything that we had from Peachtree Corners that was tailored to Gwinnett County. We're also adopting Gwinnett counties in the event that there is more out in the Peachtree Corners one. But the one from Gwinnett County controls, because that one will be adopted last, and so it will be the controlling document. We've left these in purposely because eventually during the codification process, they will use these chapters to place all the Gwinnett County information that we've passed in. The folks at the Municipal Code Corporation, which I assume we'll use, will do the codification, and they'll take that information and plug it into these 2 chapters that we've already created.
Right, okay. But in all cases, I think what we're suggesting here is that this is a framework, it's a starting point for the new city, and in the future, we may
It should all be addressed the same as it was in Gwinnett County, and that's how we built it out.
Yeah, gotcha.
That there would be no new surprises for people. They would know how to use this. They would be comfortable with it. This is what they've been using in Gwinnett, and they would continue to use that until such time you all make a determination you want to do something else.
Right, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion about emergency ordinance 250129? Hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250129 pertaining to land development. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
Thank you, Councilman Sullivan. Is any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250129 pertaining to land development is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is an emergency ordinance to provide continuation of governments during transition of services from Gwinnett County, creating a Chapter 38, manufactured homes and trailers, creating a methodology for taxation, permitting, location, and other regulations.
Madam Clerk, what's the number on that one?
Sorry, thank you, Mayor.
250130.
30, thank you. Okay, is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250130 pertaining to manufactured homes? Hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250130. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, let's call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250130 pertaining to manufactured homes is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition of provision of services from Gwinnett County, Chapter 42, nuisances, creating a framework for describing nuisances and other nuisance-like activities, prosecution, and abatement of the same. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250131.
Any discussion about emergency ordinance 250131 pertaining to nuisances?
I have a discussion point on this. So it seems like there's been, out of all the ordinances that we've discussed, this one has come up the most, I think, with the citizens. So I guess in section B, there's some language around motorized landscape maintenance devices. Is that right? And there's specifically around some hours of operation. And so can you describe the change from Gwinnett County, what Peachtree Corner, it's a 2-hour difference?
Yes, I believe they said it is 2 hours less than Gwinnett had it.
Okay, all right. So I just think that there's been some discussion with the citizens around an overreach, et cetera. I think it's important to point out that this was already existing language, both in Gwinnett. It was then also in Peachtree Corners, and all we've done is really to kind of modify some hours of operation.
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make.
It's all just to set a time frame for all of the
Gotcha.
operation of the things in general.
But is it a correct statement to say it's no more onerous except for maybe we've pulled in an hour or a couple hours? It's not as if we've sought out certain things to overreach on or to penalize people on, right?
No, it's just, I think that the 7 o'clock rather than the 9 o'clock is more tailored for a residential community.
Okay.
For the more urbanized areas, that, you know, whether do you really want the trailer to pull up at the yard at 7 o'clock and they all pull out their things? Of course, this is a policy decision for you. I've just tracked another a policy that I knew of that had already been done, but you certainly can put it at any time you want to, or we can, but that's the reason it was there. I can tell you that's the reason that the time went down on a previous ordinance, then pushed it back down to 7 o'clock, was in response to people being concerned about the noise later in the evenings.
Yeah, nuisance, okay, got it.
And we can make an adjustment to that at any point in the future.
Anytime you want.
Yeah, I think that's important for the council just to highlight, right? Because it's come up a few times out of all of these things we've highlighted. We've not added it, right? It was already existing. There's some, calibration in the future that we can do, should we choose to, around the time period. But I think that's important to highlight that this is not something we've dreamt up. So it's an adoption from an existing city or municipality that has an ordinance already in place, as does Gwinnett County too. Okay, thanks, Mr. Riley.
Yes, sir.
Any other discussion about emergency ordinance 250131 pertaining to nuisances? Okay, hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250131 pertaining to nuisances. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilman Sullivan. Any other discussion? All right, at this time I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250131 pertaining to nuisances is hereby adopted.
Next emergency ordinance we have is to provide continuation of governance during a transition of provisions of services from Gwinnett County, Chapter 46 pawn shops. This creates a framework for the licensure and requirements of operation of pawn shops. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250132.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250132 pertaining to pawn shops? Hearing none at this time, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250132 relating to pawn shops. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250132 pertaining to pawn shops is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance is an emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition of provision of services from Gwinnett County, Chapter 50, Planning and Planning Development, creating a framework for development regulations, land use plans, planning commissions, policy on withdrawal of zoning amendment applications, buffers, definitions, buffer regulation, landscape regulation, and other purposes. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250133.
Any discussion about emergency ordinance 250133 pertaining to development regulations?
Actually, I have one, if I may. I'm not trying to elongate the process, but I think this is an important one. I just want to make sure I understand. So, Mr. Riley, on this, can you explain, so we have a moratorium in place, right?
Yes, sir.
And then our objective is eventually to have a comprehensive plan. Can you kind of describe the framework? I'm not sure I fully understand how. So we have an emergency ordinance, we have a moratorium. Can you describe, our comprehensive, I know we have a goal for a comprehensive plan, but.
Well, right now, you're operating under the Gwinnett Comprehensive Plan, and that's where people would look towards. I believe that the contract that you have contemplates that you'll have a comprehensive plan done within the next 6 months. That would include charrettes that would have public input, and then you'd have the planners that will work for us to go forward and take their input and build up a plan for a long-term plan of how you anticipate you will develop properties in a general way that gives guidance to everything that the planners do, as well as gives guidance to those who want to develop as to what they may anticipate happening with the properties they may want to develop on over a long period of years. But it'll be public input, and we should have it all done within 6 months. That's our intent.
Okay, thank you.
And that process will involve multiple public hearings, involvement from the community, and we're going to need that assistance from the community to find out what the community wants our future land use to look like.
That's exactly right. It is a very comprehensive public input process with multiple meetings. I think in the jargon they call them charrettes, that to have meet with the public and take their input and develop a sense of where the community wants to be.
So once again, this is just a placeholder for us as we get started as a new city, right?
Well, this is, I would, at the point in time that you determine that you want to peel off pieces, or of the moratorium, these things would be in place and ready to go. So there will be, I would suggest that there would be a point in time that you're going to lift the moratorium, and this has to be ready at that time. So we're building the framework on it, and this is all, everything we build is a web. And so we make sure that this piece is in place.
Yeah, so I think, so just to recap, we have a moratorium.
We do.
And once the moratorium is lifted, we then have a set of, in Chapter 50, to help guide us from a planning and development perspective.
That's right.
Right, got it.
Any other discussion about emergency ordinance 250133 pertaining to development regulations and land use plans? Okay, hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250133 pertaining to development regulations. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, emergency ordinance 250133 pertaining to development regulations is hereby adopted.
The next emergency ordinance is to provide for continuation of governments during the transition of provision of services from Gwinnett County, and that is to create Chapter 54 signs, creating a framework for regulating signage. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250134.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250134 pertaining to signage? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250134. Do I have a second?
You have a second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250134 pertaining to signage is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition of provision of services from Gwinnett County, Chapter 55, solid waste, creating a framework for regulation and disposal of solid waste. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250135.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250135 pertaining to solid waste? All right, hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250135 pertaining to solid waste. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, emergency ordinance 250135 pertaining to solid waste is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition provisions of services from Gwinnett County, creating Chapter 58 telecommunication, creation of regulations for telecommunications in the city, limitations, plans, permitted uses, administrative approvals, tall structures, the legal status, and for other purposes. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250136.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250136 pertaining to telecommunications? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250136 pertaining to telecommunications. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250136 relating to telecommunications is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is emergency ordinance to provide for continuation of governance during transition of provision of services from Gwinnett County to the city of Mulberry, creating Chapter 62 utilities, adoption of Gwinnett County ordinances by reference on water and sewer regulations, use of public sewers, maintenance of private sewer lines, private wastewater disposal, sewer connections, pretreatment, fats, oils, and grease. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250137.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250137 pertaining to water and sewer utility? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250137 pertaining to water and sewer utilities. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250137 pertaining to water and sewer is hereby adopted.
The next emergency ordinance we have is for the provide for the continuation of governance during the transition of provisions of services from Gwinnett County, creating a zoning resolution, creating zoning for the city, adoption of a zoning map, and adoption of the Gwinnett County zoning cases. What number would you have on that one, Madam Clerk?
250138.
Is there any discussion about emergency ordinance 250138 pertaining to zoning in the city of Mulberry?
I have a question. Adoption of Gwinnett County zoning cases. Can you explain the process on that, Mr. Riley?
Your zoning includes the zoning cases for any particular lot. You know, on your residential lot, you're subject to specific zoning. You came in and you needed to have a variance because you needed to have, you wanted to encroach into the buffer zone to build some kind of water feature. And you went to the county and they had a hearing on your case and they said, on that lot right there, there's a variance that would allow you to encroach into the buffer zone to build your water feature. Well, that is part of the entire zoning text now, if you will. Is part of the zoning for the county, but it is only applicable to your lot, and that's the zoning cases that we adopt. So when the community development director or somebody goes in and looks at a request for zoning or rezoning, or even if code enforcement looks to see if it's a violation of the zoning, they would go in and they could look at the zoning case to see how that particular parcel has particular zoning requirements that others might not.
I guess my question is, and I see Kevin here, so thanks for joining us tonight. I just want to make sure, so is it a correct statement to say the contract for services that we have with CPL, I guess, is going to help us in making sure that we serve the citizens of Mulberry as they try to figure out how they may, if they find themselves in a zoning case or as they go, that will be a service that we will be taking on very quickly, right?
That as soon as you lift the moratorium.
The moratorium, okay.
Yes,
All right.
and we would contemplate that the county would turn over the zoning cases to us.
Yeah.
Rather than us having to go to the county and look at those zoning cases. But
Yeah.
that would be something that our contractor will work with the county on to see if we can take custody of all those case files.
Gotcha, okay. There's a lot of questions about this, so thanks for entertaining these questions, because a lot of citizens have been asking, I think all of us, about how this affects them and their personal situation. So thank you for shedding light on that. That's all the questions I have.
I'll just say too, I think one of the things we'll do is once we have these ordinances in place, is I think we'll be in much better position to maybe go forward to the public and maybe do a video or some sort of explanation of kind of the process moving forward. So I think that's something that we could potentially as a council put together as well, to just kind of talk about the process moving forward. Is there any other discussion about emergency ordinance 250138? All right. At this point, I'll make a motion to adopt emergency ordinance 250138, which pertains to zoning in the city of Mulberry. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right. All in favor? All opposed? All right. By a vote of 4, emergency ordinance 250138 pertaining to zoning in the city of Mulberry is hereby adopted.
Mr. Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem and Council, I would ask that on item T, this emergency ordinance, I'd ask you just to remove that from the agenda. We have submitted the ordinance that you passed on last night to the insurance commissioner. The insurance commissioner's attorney has reviewed it on today and has given me written notice that he believes that what we have submitted is sufficient for the purposes that we need to go forward with our collection of the insurance tax premiums. So we've had a favorable response from the insurance commissioner today on what we've already filed, and I don't know that there's any need to file the emergency or have an emergency ordinance at this time.
Great. Okay, thank you. That will conclude the emergency ordinances for this evening. So now we're going to move on to item K, which is the second read of the ordinances. So Mr. Riley, I will turn it back over to you again.
Thank you very much. These second read ordinances are the same in nature that we had as the emergency ordinances. The difference on these is that we're going to have a public hearing on signs and on the creation of the zoning resolution. That will be the difference in those cases. The first is an ordinance which was 250101, second read, creating a system of regulation on sexually oriented businesses and the presentation of the supporting data. I'd ask you to take the data that was previously presented by Mr. Berthold on the first read of this meeting, and I'm giving you thumb drives of the same as well as the presentation, and vote affirmatively for 250101. I'm sorry, this is the sexually oriented business regulation piece that we have. Mr. Berthold spoke to it, the lawyer from Chattanooga. And this is the one you got the thumb drives on and you got the presentation on. It required you to have the supporting data for that. Mr. Berthold has indicated that we don't have to have a second presentation because you've already had one, and we can show that you have knowledge to make that decision on tonight.
Is there any questions for Mr. Riley regarding ordinance 250101 pertaining to sexually oriented businesses? Okay, none. Do we need to do an adoption?
you need to make a motion to approve and a second, and if you're so desire to vote it in.
Okay. At this time, I will make a motion to adopt ordinance 250101 pertaining to sexually oriented businesses in the city of Mulberry. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, at this time I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All right, ordinance 250101 pertaining to sexual oriented businesses in the city of Mulberry is hereby adopted.
The next, pardon me. The next item we have is ordinance 250102, second read of an ordinance creating Chapter 1, general provisions, setting methodologies, terms, definitions, penalties, and for other services for the city of Mulberry.
Is there any discussion about ordinance 250102 pertaining to the methodologies for the ordinances? All right, hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250102. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilman Ingram. Is there any other discussion? All right, all in favor? Call a vote. All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, ordinance number 250102 is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have for a second read is 250103. It's the second read for Chapter 2, Administration, creating a framework for the administration for the city of Mulberry government.
Any discussion about 250103 pertaining to administration in the city? Okay, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250103 pertaining to administration. Do I have a second?
Second the motion.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? All right, by a vote of 4, ordinance 250103 pertaining to administration is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250104. It is the second read of an ordinance creating Chapter 6, alcoholic beverages, creating a framework for controlling sales and distribution of alcoholic beverages within the city of Mulberry.
Any discussion about ordinance 250104 pertaining to alcoholic beverages? All right, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250104 pertaining to alcoholic beverages within the city of Mulberry. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? All right, by a vote of 4, ordinance 250104 pertaining to alcoholic beverages is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is ordinance number 250105 for second read to adopt an ordinance for Chapter 10, Buildings and Building Regulations, creating a framework for construction, maintenance, enforcement, and demolition on properties within the city of Mulberry.
Any discussion about ordinance 250105 pertaining to buildings or building regulations? All right, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250105. Do I have a second?
Do you have a second?
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? All right, by a vote of 4, ordinance 250105 pertaining to buildings and building regulations is hereby adopted.
On number, I'd ask on F that you just take that off of the agenda for today. We went ahead and voted on that early, so we could go ahead and get started on billing out our occupation tax certificates and our other licensing certificates on the 23rd. So we don't have to have a vote on that since we already voted. The next one we'd have after that would be 250106. That's the second read of an ordinance creating Chapter 18, Environment, creating a framework for erosion control, runoff, illicit discharge, and stormwater management and litter control.
Any discussion about ordinance 250106 pertaining to stormwater management and litter control? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250106 pertaining to stormwater management and litter control. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right. Call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All right. By a vote of 4, ordinance 250106 pertaining to stormwater management and litter control are hereby adopted.
Next is ordinance 250107, second read of an ordinance for the city of Mulberry creating Chapter 22 fire protection, creating a framework for fire safety regulations.
Any discussion about ordinance 250107 about fire safety? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250107. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
Thank you, Councilman Sullivan. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor? All right, all opposed? Ordinance 250107 pertaining to fire safety regulations is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250108, second read of an ordinance, City of Mulberry creating Chapter 26 floods, creating a flood management plan for flood damage prevention and framework for its implementation.
Any discussion about ordinance 250108 pertaining to flood management? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250108 pertaining to flood management. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor, I'll call a vote. All opposed? By a vote of 4, ordinance 250108 pertaining to flood management is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250109, second read of an ordinance, City of Mulberry, creating Chapter 34 land development regulation, creating a framework for for requirements for land development.
Any discussion about ordinance 250109 pertaining to land development? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250109 pertaining to land development regulation. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, ordinance 250109 pertaining to land development is hereby adopted.
The next one we have is 250110. That is a second read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry creating Chapter 38 manufactured homes and trailers, creating methodology for taxation, permitted location, and for other regulations.
Any discussion about ordinance 250110 pertaining to manufactured homes? Okay, hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt ordinance 250110 pertaining to manufactured homes. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, ordinance 250110 pertaining to manufactured homes is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250111, second read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 42 nuisances, creating a framework for describing nuisances and other nuisance-like activities, prosecution and abatement of the same.
Any discussion about ordinance 250111 pertaining to nuisances? Nope. Then I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250111 pertaining to nuisances. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, ordinance 250111 pertaining to nuisances is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250112, second read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 46 pawn shops, creating framework for the licensure and requirements in operation of pawn shops.
Any discussion about ordinance 250112 pertaining to pawn shops? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250112 pertaining to pawn shops. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, ordinance 250112 pertaining to pawn shops is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250113, second read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 50 planning and development, creating framework for development regulations, land use plans, planning commissions, policy on withdrawal of zoning amendment applications, buffers, definitions, buffer regulations, landscape regulations, and for other purposes.
Is there any discussion about ordinance 250113 pertaining to planning and development and zoning regulations? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250113. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, ordinance 250113 is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance is 250114, second read of an ordinance of the City of Mulberry creating Chapter 54 signs, creating framework for regulating signage. This will require a public hearing, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Ladies and gentlemen, so we are, this has a public hearing component related to signage. So we're going to limit, it'll be 2 different sides. For those that are in favor of the signage, that side will be limited to 10 minutes. For those who oppose the signage ordinance, they will be limited to 10 minutes. So at this time, I will open up public comments for those that are in favor of ordinance 250114 pertaining to signage. Seeing no one to speak, I will go ahead and close public comments for those in favor. For anyone who would like to speak in opposition of ordinance 250114, I will open up the public hearing for those in opposition of that ordinance. Seeing no one, I will close public comments for those in opposition of ordinance 250114. Is there any discussion by the council regarding ordinance 250114 signage? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250114 pertaining to signage in the city of Mulberry. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I will call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, by a vote of 4, ordinance 250114 pertaining to signage is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is 250115, second read of an ordinance of the City of Mulberry creating Chapter 55 solid waste, creating a framework for the regulation and disposal of solid waste.
Is there any discussion about ordinance 250115 pertaining to solid waste? Hearing none, I will make a motion to adopt ordinance 250115 pertaining to solid waste. Do I have a second?
You have a second?
Thank you, Councilman Sullivan. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All right, by a vote of 4, ordinance 250115 is hereby adopted.
Next ordinance we have is 250116, second read of an ordinance of the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 58 telecommunications, creation of regulations for telecommunications within the city, limitations, plans, permitted uses, administrative approvals, tall structures, legal status, and for other purposes.
Is there any discussion about ordinance 250116 pertaining to telecommunications? All right, hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250116 pertaining to telecommunications. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Ordinance 250116 by a vote of 4 pertaining to telecommunications is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is ordinance 250117, second read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry creating Chapter 62 utilities, adoption of Gwinnett County ordinances by reference on water and sewer utility regulations, use of public sewers, maintenance of private sewer lines, private wastewater disposal, sewer connections, pretreatment, fats, oils, and grease.
Is there any discussion about ordinance 250117 pertaining to water and sewer utility? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 250117. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, ordinance number 250117 pertaining to water and sewer utility is hereby adopted.
The next ordinance we have is 250118. This is second read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating zoning resolution, creating a zoning for the city, adoption of a zoning map, and adoption of the Gwinnett County zoning cases. This one also will require a public hearing, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Just like the sign ordinance, we will open up the floor 10 minutes for each side for those who are in favor of ordinance 250118, the zoning ordinance, and 10 minutes for those opposed. So at this time, I will open the public comments for those who would like to speak in favor of ordinance 250118. Seeing none, I will go ahead and close public comments for those wishing to speak in favor of the ordinance. I'll open up public comments for those wishing to speak in opposition of Ordinance 250118. Seeing none, I will close public comments in its entirety. Is there any discussion with the council regarding Ordinance 250118 pertaining to zoning in the city of Mulberry? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt Ordinance 250118 pertaining to zoning within the city limits of the city of Mulberry.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? By a vote of 4, Ordinance 250118 pertaining to zoning is hereby adopted.
I'd ask that you remove item number T, ordinance 250119, from the agenda for the same reason as I stated for the emergency ordinance. The insurance commissioner has received our ordinance for collection of insurance premium taxes, and their council has said that it meets the criteria that they wish to have. So I don't see the need to re-adopt that ordinance at this point in time, since we'd adopted it last night.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. At this point, we are going to move into item L on the agenda, which is the first read of the ordinances. And so I will turn it back over to Mr. Riley for that.
Thank you very much. We're going to do a first read on these ordinances again, that are the ones that you have just previously passed. We will have a second read on a number of those on tomorrow, because that will exceed the 24-hour period that's required between a first and second read. I'm sorry, not tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow now. It is tomorrow. As long as we get through before 9 o'clock, we'll have the 24 hours covered. All right. This is a first read on an ordinance for the city of Mulberry, Georgia, creating a system of regulation of sexually oriented business and presentation of supporting data for adoption. What number would you have now, Madam Clerk?
250139.
The next is a first read of an ordinance for City of Mulberry, creating Chapter 1, general provisions for setting methodologies, terms of use, definitions, penalties, and for other purposes for the city for the Mulberry Code of Ordinances. What number do you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250140.
The next ordinance is first read of an ordinance, City of Mulberry, creating Chapter 2, administration, creating a framework for the administration of the City of Mulberry government. What number would you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250141.
The next ordinance is a first read of an ordinance of the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 6, alcoholic beverages, creating a framework for controlling sales and distribution of alcoholic beverages. What number would you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250142.
The next ordinance is a first read of an ordinance for the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 10, buildings and building regulations, creating a framework for construction, maintenance, enforcement, and demolition on properties within the City of Mulberry. What number would you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250143.
The next ordinance would be a first read of an ordinance, the City of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 14, businesses, creating a framework for operation and licensing of various businesses within the City of Mulberry. What number will you have for that, Madam Clerk?
241243.
Madam Clerk, if you could just give me a new number for that. If we could have 250144.
250144.
The next ordinance we have is ordinance, first read of an ordinance creating Chapter 18, environment, creating a framework for erosion control, runoff, illicit discharge, stormwater management, and litter control.
250145.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The next ordinance we have is first read of an ordinance, Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 22, Fire Protection, creating framework for fire safety regulations. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250146.
Next ordinance we have is the first read of an ordinance for the city of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 26, floods, creating a flood management plan for flood damage prevention and framework for its implementation. What number would that be, Madam Clerk?
250147.
The next ordinance we have is first read of an ordinance, the city of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 34, land development regulations, creating framework for requirements for land development. What number will that be, Madam Clerk?
250148.
The next ordinance we have is a first read of an ordinance for the city of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 38, manufactured homes and trailers, creating a methodology of taxation, permitting, location, and other regulations. What number will we have that for that, Madam Clerk?
250149.
The next ordinance we have is a first read of an ordinance for the city of Mulberry, creating Chapter 42, nuisances, creating framework for describing nuisances and other nuisance-like activities, prosecution, and abatement. What number would you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250150.
The next ordinance is a first read of an ordinance, city of Mulberry, creating Chapter 46, pawn shops, creating a framework for the licensure and requirements and operation of pawn shops. What number will you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250151.
The next ordinance we have is a first read of an ordinance creating Chapter 50, planning and development, creating framework for development regulations, land use plans, planning commissions, policy on withdrawal of zoning amendment applications, buffers, definitions, buffer regulations, landscape regulations, and for other purposes. What number would you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250152.
The next ordinance we have is the first read of an ordinance, City of Mulberry, creating Chapter 54, signs, creating framework for regulating signage. What number will that be?
250153.
The second read on that ordinance will be on January 23rd, at which point in time we'll have to have a public hearing on that one. The next ordinance we have is a first read of an ordinance creating Chapter 55, solid waste, creating a framework for the regulation of disposal of solid waste. What ordinance number do you have on that, Madam Clerk?
250154.
The next ordinance we have is a first read of an ordinance for the city of Mulberry, Georgia, creating Chapter 58, telecommunications, creation of regulations for telecommunications in the city, limitations, plans, permitted uses, administrative approvals, tall structures, legal status, and other purposes. What number do you have that for that, Madam Clerk?
250155.
The next ordinance we have is first read of an ordinance from the city of Mulberry creating Chapter 62, utilities, adoption of Gwinnett County ordinances by reference on water and sewer utility regulations, use of public sewers, maintenance for private sewer lines, private wastewater disposal, sewer connection, pretreatment, fats, oils, and grease. What number do you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250156.
The next ordinance we have is first read of ordinance for the city of Mulberry, creating zoning resolution, creating zoning for the city, adoption of a zoning map, and adoption of Gwinnett County zoning cases. What number do you have for that, Madam Clerk?
250157.
That one will have its second read on January 23rd, and there will be need to have a public hearing on that item on that date. The next ordinance we have is the first read of an ordinance of the city of Mulberry creating an insurance premium tax, but we do not need that one anymore. So I'll ask that we remove that from the list.
Thank you, Mr. Riley.
I think we've done good so far. That's all I have at this point, except for the additions that you have. I have one that I will speak to, and I know you already had another one, Mayor.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Riley. We had two additional items. I marked them as L1 and L2. The first one is to adopt the statutory record-keeping resolution for the clerk. Do we have a ordinance number, resolution number on that, or no?
That would be, we would, that would be, the resolution on that should be Resolution 0125. We've only had one resolution so far this year, right? The 01 was the
Yeah.
so
The
this would be
moratorium, so this would be
So this would be
02.
02.
Okay, thank you.
Resolution 02, yes.
Okay. Is there any discussion about adopting a statutory record-keeping, the resolution on behalf of the clerk as 012502? Okay, hearing none, I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 012502 pertaining to statutory record-keeping for the clerk of the city of Mulberry. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, I will call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All right. Resolution 012502 pertaining to record-keeping is hereby adopted. The next item, or the final kind of action item on the list, is I've marked as L2, is, well, Councilman Ingram, do you want to give us an update, just a quick update? It's in mind that it's 1:11 a.m. on the City of Mulberry's office space.
Yeah, the quick update. Last night, as you know, we had a discussion about the office space. We did not have a prime lease so we're going to be subleasing space from a location in Terran Trace, and the current tenant did not provide us a prime lease. We needed to amend the current contract to include some provisions. Mr. Riley provided those provisions. I've had a discussion with the current tenant, and he's also called the landlord, which is a out-of-state landlord, and they are fine with the city of Mulberry subletting the space, which is great news. And we have amended the contract. He's given me a verbal that he's fine with it. He's ready to sign it. And as of 9 o'clock or 9:10 p.m., I've also gotten the prime lease, and I'll share that with you, Mr. Riley. You can take a look through that.
Okay, I'm holding a copy of the commercial sublease. This is for the space located at 2089 Terran Trace, Suite 120, Decula, Georgia 30019, which will serve as the headquarters for the city of Mulberry and as our office space. At this time, is there any discussion about this commercial sublease, about the space on Terran Trace? Any other discussion by the council? All right, hearing none, I will take a motion regarding the commercial sublease.
I'd like to make a motion that we ratify and sign, or have you, Mr. Mayor, sign that lease agreement to allow us to take occupancy of that space at 2089 Terran Trace. Is that right?
That's right.
Suite 120.
Okay. So we have a motion from Councilman Ingram to allow the mayor to execute this commercial sublease on behalf of the city of Mulberry for office space. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All right, it is passed by a vote of 4 that the mayor will execute the commercial sublease for the space located at 2089 Terran Trace, Suite 120 in Decula, Georgia. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you so much for coming out. Do you have anything else, Mr. Riley? Okay. Thank you for coming out this evening. I know that it's not easy to come at midnight on New Year's Eve, so thank you for being here, for witnessing history. I will say this, one of the constituents of mine in District 2 had a great idea that if you would like to be in a photo, maybe we'll take one big group photo of anybody that's here to commemorate the event, and then we'll maybe hang it in the office space. So feel free to stick around if you want to be in that photo. Why don't you just come on up front? We'll take a quick photo as soon as we finish. But other than that, I want to personally thank you, I know on behalf of myself and the council, for being here. And it's official. Welcome to the city of Mulberry. So at this time, I will make a motion to adjourn our meeting of the City of Mulberry.
You have a second, Mayor.
Thank you. And then is there any other discussion? All right, I'll call a vote. All in favor? All opposed? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you guys so much. You have a great evening.